Hello, folks. I think we're ready to get started again. And it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Jonathan Putnam, who is a veteran of the Office of International Affairs. We've worked together for almost 20 years on the World Heritage Program. John is one of our 3-person World Heritage team and is the natural resources expert for our office, advising on nominations that involve the natural criteria, and also giving us expert advice in when we were serving on the committee in terms of impacts to natural properties around the world. And John is a longtime National Park Service expert as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to John to begin the next part of the program. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Steve. And good morning, everyone. Good morning, especially to those, I guess maybe it's not even truly morning yet. I know we've got some folks calling in from Alaska and Hawaii, where I don't think the sun has even popped up over the horizon. So kudos to you for joining us so early. Also, I really wanted to thank Christine Jacobs and the team at San Antonio Missions for organizing this Site Managers Forum. As we've already mentioned, this is something we've been interested in doing for a while, and the fact that this is really being driven at the field level, I think, is critical, because ultimately our office, our goal is to make sure that the sites themselves, the site managers, see some value in this designation and put it to good use, hopefully. When asked, I often tell folks, the World Heritage is the designation is what you make of it, and it's not necessarily a judgment call, but some sites put the plaque up on their visitor center and pretty much call it a day. But others really have seen some benefits from using this designation and promoting the value. So anyway, now I'm going to go to the most challenging part of any presentation: sharing my screen and making sure that this works. Okay, can I get a thumbs up from someone, or you all see it? Great, thank you, Philip. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about World Heritage reporting. There are various types of reporting that we as you as World Heritage Site Managers are responsible for. You can see the subtitle here is Advancing the Conservation Mandate of the Convention. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how the convention has 2 primary goals. And this reporting is really about that conservation angle of the goal. And I know you all have heard some of this already this morning, but again, a little bit of a refresher. The convention, we're just about to celebrate its 50th anniversary next month. Again, the U.S. National Park idea has really played an important role in conceiving the convention back in the 1960s. Several Americans, including Russell Train, who you may hear more about later this week, was really one of the founding fathers of the convention. Again, this idea of merging natural and cultural heritage management and protection under one umbrella was something that the U.S. played a huge role in. Others were seeing them as separate, but the U.S. advocated for them being placed under one instrument. And we have almost 200 countries now parties to the convention, over 1,000 sites. And again, here in red in this next slide, you'll see there really are 2 primary goals of the convention. And the first is simply the identification of the world's most significant natural and cultural heritage sites. And that is ultimately what we know as the World Heritage List, that list of over 1,000 sites currently. And of course, that's where a lot of the attention has been given to World Heritage. It's all about the run-up, the nominations, the ultimate, hopefully, inclusion on the World Heritage List. That's what gets people excited, motivated. That's what gets, again, the media's attention. But often in that, the second part, in many ways, the more important part, the conservation side of it, is often somewhat forgotten. But that is obviously an important, well, a hugely important aspect of the convention's purpose, that once you're on the list, okay, now what? Now you have to preserve and protect these places for both present and future generations. So that's pretty much everything else that the convention is supposed to do. And again, a little bit of background on the World Heritage Committee, because this is the body, the entity to which we are reporting to. And it is 21, it's a rotating committee of 21 state parties, so national governments, which are elected to the World Heritage Committee for usually 4-year terms. And that's the body which makes all decisions about which nominations are accepted, which are denied, which may be postponed for a future attempt. But they also make decisions on things like the danger listing proposals, funding, etc. And the U.S. has served several times on the committee, but we have not been on the committee for more than a decade now. The committee does typically meet annually. As we may have heard, I think you heard from Steve earlier, there's been more than a bit of a hiccup this year. We hope again they'll resume annual meetings in 2023. The other important thing to remember about the committee is that it is advised by 2 so-called advisory bodies, primarily ICOMOS, we're all familiar with ICOMOS, for cultural heritage matters, and IUCN, International Union for the Conservation of Nature, for natural heritage issues. And again, they are providing expert advice to the committee on nominations, on conservation issues, etc., including the reporting that I'm going to get to momentarily. We've all heard now there are, in the US, there are 24 World Heritage Sites, most of which are wholly or partly administered by the Park Service, but of course we have quite a few that have other management entities. And then we have our small staffs, Steve, you met, myself, and Phyllis Ellen, who helps coordinate our work on cultural sites. Phyllis actually, ironically, is spending today virtually attending World Heritage Center orientation to the periodic reporting exercise, which is just now underway and which I will get to later in this presentation. So reporting, which is the focus of this presentation. There really are 3 buckets, I guess, of reporting that we're involved in. One is reactive, when things pop up and we have to respond to them. Proactive, when issues that we know may be coming up, we're supposed to report to the committee in advance. And then finally, the periodic reporting. So starting with reactive reporting. These are typically, again, in 2 sort of subcategories themselves. The most formal of this is state of conservation reports. So these are reports that are requested by the World Heritage Committee itself. So in a decision made by the committee, they will request a state party to submit a report, usually within a year, sometimes a couple of years from the date of the decision, back to the World Heritage Center and through them to the committee on whatever that conservation concern is of the committee. And by far the site which has been most involved in the U.S. with this is Everglades National Park. They've been on the World Heritage and Danger List going on now close to, I think, over 30 years, other than a short break about 10 years or so ago. And so for much of that time, every other year or so, they've submitted quite a comprehensive report to the committee on what the Park Service and the U.S. government, really, the federal government, is doing to try to restore the Everglades and ensure that its outstanding universal value is protected into the future. And this is an extremely lengthy, as you can imagine, process, pulling together all of the data, updates on the conservation measures being taken by the U.S. government, by the Park Service, by the Army Corps of Engineers, by the state of Florida, and many other players. But the park, I believe, has seen this exercise is actually very useful for them, sort of forces them, if you will, to bring all of this data together every few years to see how things are standing vis-a-vis these conservation benchmarks and measures that we've all agreed to, and see over time how things hopefully are improving. Other places that have recently had to submit state of conservation reports, there are many, but just a few include Grand Canyon National Park, Poverty Point State Historic Site in Louisiana, and Waterton Glacier International Peace Park in Montana and British Columbia and Alberta. And there is a standard format provided by the World Heritage Center. It's relatively straightforward. The Everglades model is far more than is perhaps required by the committee. But again, I think it's something that the park itself has found very useful in bringing together. And through this process, I think we can point to some real conservation success stories by having to go through this process. And one example, again, back to Waterton Glacier International Peace Park, it's a transboundary site between the US and Canada. There had been proposals for decades to develop the Flathead River Valley in British Columbia, immediately adjacent to Waterton Lakes and to Glacier National Park, to the Flathead River, which forms the western boundary of Glacier National Park in Montana. And for all those years, the US and Canada could not come to an agreement on how to protect or how to manage really this Flathead Valley in British Columbia. They worked through the International Joint Commission and other fora to try to come up to a solution, but they were unsuccessful. And it was only in 2010 when the World Heritage Committee and World Heritage Center and others, this really started getting into their attention. And they asked for a state of conservation report. And this included a joint mission from the World Heritage Center and from IUCN to visit both Glacier and Waterton Lakes and look at this Flathead River Valley and talk to all of the key players from the US government, the Canadian government, the state and provincial governments involved. And this included literally a flyover in a small aircraft over the Flathead Valley in British Columbia. Once I think they saw how this was all connected, the center and IUCN prepared a very detailed report that went back to the committee on if this energy proposal went forward, it would clearly present an imminent threat to the OUV, the outstanding universal value of the World Heritage Site. And this ultimately convinced both the government of British Columbia and the state of Montana to sign an MOU to not develop the Flathead Valley on either side of the US-Canada border. And so I think we can really point to this as a way that the World Heritage designation provided that venue, that forum for them to come together and have some international pressure, quite frankly, on the Canadians in particular, to do something to protect this site. Another fairly recent example is at Grand Canyon National Park. This is so strictly a domestic example here, but there had been proposals, I think they still remain, but proposals for both uranium development and a pretty large housing development just on the south rim of the national park on US National Forest land. And the superintendent at the time was challenged to try to raise some of these concerns through higher levels of the US government. But it was again the request by the World Heritage Committee and Center for Information on this potential threat to the OUV that was able to get him sort of the foot in the door with higher ups in both the Department of the Interior and also the Department of Agriculture, which oversees the Forest Service. And that led to an agreement to, at least for now, to not do any kind of development, this housing development on Forest Service land. So even an iconic site, a manager of an iconic site like Grand Canyon could see how this World Heritage designation provided an additional tool for raising their concerns about this threat. So those are the more, the state of conservation reports, those are the most formal aspects, but we also frequently get written inquiries from the World Heritage Center. So again, not the committee itself, but the professional staff, who the secretariat for the convention. And so these are often, someone will bring it to their attention, what they see as a threat to a World Heritage Site. Sometimes it comes through one of the advisory bodies. Sometimes the center staff just reads about an issue in the media or some other NGO approaches them And so the center then sends a letter to us, to the Office of International Affairs, also often to the U.S. Embassy in Paris, and asking for a written response on behalf of the state part of the U.S. Government. And so our job in the International Affairs Office is to then go out to the site involved, try to get a better understanding of what the threat is, if there is a threat, and then what that site and perhaps the larger federal government and state parties, potential responses to that threat may be. And so we will work all the way up the leadership of the Department of Interior and whatever the other relevant U.S. agencies may be, and then coordinate that response. And depending on the level of the issue, the level of the threat potentially, or the political nature of the issue, that will then dictate who's actually signing the U.S. government's response. Sometimes it could be the director of the Park Service or the director of another agency, or it could be our Assistant Secretary of the Interior, Fish and Wildlife and Parks, or perhaps even a secretary. But our office is the one that coordinates that response. And just a few examples, again, recently, Chaco culture, in New Mexico, there have been concerns about energy development around the World Heritage Site, and so of course we've worked closely with the Bureau of Land Management to come up with occasional responses to the World Heritage Center on what the U.S. government is doing on that issue. Redwood National State Parks, there have been some concerns about proposed new road alignments. So we've worked with the park, and they've provided very detailed and helpful responses back to the center on what that issue is and where things stand. And then Olympic National Park in Washington there've been concerns about U.S. Navy overflights and potential sound impacts. And again, we've had to respond back to the center on what the U.S. government is doing to minimize or mitigate any of those challenges. So that's reactive reporting. Then also there's proactive reporting. And so you can see here in the operational guidelines of the convention, one of the more famous paragraphs is para, as they say, para 172. And this really is about inviting or really encouraging state parties to let the center, the committee, know about, as you can see here, major restorations or new constructions which may affect the outstanding universal value of the property. And again, notice should be given as soon as possible. And so we ask site managers if if they have plans for any kind of major restoration or new constructions, to get in touch with us as early as possible. And we can then help determine whether actually we do need to inform the center and the committee. If we're talking about simply repaving an existing parking lot or doing maintenance on a visitor center at a site, that's not the kind of thing that they want to know about. But if there is a major construction, if there's going to be a massive new parking lot or a major new building that could impact the OUV, then we may need to let the center know. And some examples which have happened recently, you can see here, both the Statue of Liberty, then Monticello and UVA, which are part of the same site but had independent projects. They all prepared a fairly detailed heritage impact analysis of these proposals, which we worked with them on and analyzed if they would affect the OUV. I think in all those cases, clearly we said that they would not have a significant impact on the OUV, but we shared that with the World Heritage Center, and in all those cases, ICOMOS also would play a role in analyzing our reports, and then they would advise the center and the committee ultimately on whether they agreed with that. But again, the key thing here is if you're planning something, please get in touch with us at the beginning, rather than when it's halfway or finished, And then we have to explain, why we didn't inform the committee of it. And then finally, there's periodic reporting, and this is what, honestly, in some ways, I think this is if nothing else from this presentation, this is what I'm hoping this message gets through to the site managers, particularly involved in this call today, because we're now just starting the third periodic reporting exercise for Europe and North America. We had an earlier one. The first one was, I think, 2005, 2006. Another one was in 2013. And so hopefully for those of you who are site managers and on our point of contact list, you have by now received the instructions from the World Heritage Center on how to access this periodic reporting questionnaire. And if you haven't seen it, please get in touch with us as soon as possible. There's a lot of great information and resources and instructions on this site below. And so the periodic reporting, again, is supposed to be like the really high level picture of the state of conservation, an assessment of how things are going with World Heritage in a given country. And section 1 is the one that our office will be responsible for filling out. And that is, at the national level, how are things going with World Heritage. And then for you all as site managers, section 2 is what's relevant. And that is, again, all of you have been, each of the sites should have a focal point, usually the site manager or someone else who's been delegated by the site manager to complete this questionnaire. And this questionnaire has largely been pre-filled by the center. I mean, this is one, I guess, big advantage over what we've done. The first report back in 2005, 2006 was literally a written report. So we had to, start from scratch, essentially. The second one, 2013, similar to the current exercise, was a questionnaire. So you had multiple choices, but also bubbles to fill in with typically relatively brief answers, but they can be extended as appropriate. So that makes your job a lot easier. But that said, it's still going to be a relatively time-consuming exercise for you as at the site level. And that's why we do ask that you check to make sure you have access to the questionnaire. If not, let us know. And then you will also really need to get that questionnaire finished from your end, certainly no later than March of next spring. Our office is going to then have to go over all of those 24 reports to quote unquote validate before we can submit them to the World Heritage Committee, and they may require even higher level approval or review than our office. So that's why we ask that you get those in sooner rather than later. And so that is where things stand on the various reporting things that we all do. I'm sure we have some time for questions, and if we have any site managers who maybe want to share some of their experiences with either state of conservation reporting or other reactive reporting or proactive reporting for that matter, we'd love to hear from you. And I'll turn it back over to Steve or Christine.
Thank you, John. And I just would like to add one additional bit of information regarding the requests that we get from the World Heritage Center. Sometimes they don't actually pertain to U.S. World Heritage sites, but they pertain to impacts that actions in the United States could have on another country's World Heritage site. For example, recently we were sent a petition or a complaint from a US-based NGO regarding the monarch butterfly habitat in the United States, and how that was, urging that the US take stronger actions to protect habitat for monarch butterflies, which originate and go back to the Monarch Butterfly Reserve in Mexico, which is a World Heritage site. And so our office's job was to coordinate with the Fish and Wildlife Service to respond to those concerns. So it's not always just US sites that we're being asked to respond to inquiries about.
I don't know if we have any questions or.
Jonathan, this is Christine. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I know for World Heritage Site managers, a couple of months ago, it was a little bit of a short poll notice, but there was an inquiry about GIS data and mapping. Can you give all of us an update about where that information went for those who submitted it, and what that looks like, and if that's something that there'll be another opportunity to participate in that on behalf of U.S. World Heritage Sites to make sure our GIS data is included in what I understand it's a global project. Is that right?
Yeah, to be honest, we haven't heard much about that since that initial request came in with a very short turnaround request, as I recall. We'd have to go back and see if they're still looking for input on that. Several years ago, maybe Steve can help me refresh my memory, but we actually updated all of our maps with the World Heritage Center as part of, I guess, the retrospective inventory as well. So my sense is that we're pretty current with our GIS and map, needs for the center. But I don't know, Steve, was that anything else to add to that?
Yeah, no, not really. I think you're right. We had provided, I think it was after the first cycle of periodic reporting, we had provided very comprehensive updated GIS maps for all the US sites. So I think we're in pretty good standing in that regard.
I just want to make a couple other quick points, and this is not really reporting per se, but since we have all these site managers here, one, I think it's great that we have the network of US site managers, and hopefully we'll be able to build and maintain that. But just again, as a reminder that obviously World Heritage is a network of over 1,000 sites, and so also this gives you a platform to network and learn and share from site managers all across the globe. And some of you may recall that for a while we hosted a US World Heritage Fellows program where we had funding from, I guess, the UN Foundation, but we were able to bring in World Heritage Site managers from developing nations to the US to spend several weeks or even a couple of months at one of our World Heritage Sites and share some of their experiences, but also learn from our site managers. And whether or not something like that gets revived, would be great if it were. But again, just think about this designation, this convention provides you all an opportunity to learn from site managers all across the globe.
Yeah, and I might just add that I think one of the best examples of the network that you mentioned, John, is the participation of some of our marine, what you might call marine World Heritage sites in the UNESCO, the World Heritage Center's Marine Managers Network. So this is a group of, I think, 70 or so World Heritage sites around the world that are considered to be marine World Heritage sites. And I know Philip Hooge is on the call, and maybe he can speak to this, but they, at Glacier Bay National Park in Alaska, they hosted the most recent meeting of the Marine Managers Network a couple of years ago. And it's through that process that Glacier Bay developed a very active partnership. In fact, there are sister parks now between Glacier Bay and West Norwegian fjords, and there's been some really excellent sharing of best practices and experience between those two World Heritage sites. So in my mind, that's really a perfect example of how to leverage the World Heritage designation to tap into this global network and really address management challenges that are faced in similar ways between different countries. And Philip, if you're on now, maybe you could say a few words about that.
No, I mean, I think you covered it really well, Stephen. It was that has been a really active and productive group, and it provided because the meetings happen every other year, it provided a forum for us to find similarities. And when we for example, found that the same exact boats with the same exact problems were in West Norwegian fjords and Glacier Bay. The concept of sharing management paradigms was obvious. I will mention also that in the case of that partnership, we leveraged actually bringing in politicians, members of parliament from Norway into Southeast Alaska to see the different models for managing cruise tourism. Then Norway stole some of our best ideas and moved on.
Well, Steve, I do see some questions here in the chat. Maybe we can answer some of these. One is, what do the World Heritage Center and Committee do with the periodic reports? What is the impact of these reports? And I guess I think they largely see these as sort of global efforts to get a big picture of what's going on with the World Heritage, and what are there other trends? Are there major trends we can see in the types of threats or successes that they can report on, globally? I think climate change is clearly an obvious place, but there may be other things, visitor impacts that are affecting, some sites more than others. So ultimately, I think this is more for the center and the committee in many ways to get a big picture understanding. Although I would say also for our sites, especially over time, as you see things every 6 or 7 years, it's an opportunity for our sites to see see trends and some of the challenges that they may be facing. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I would say it's more of a big picture kind of report. They roll it all up from the entire region. It's as John reported or mentioned, we report along with Europe, so it's one giant region, Europe and North America, which includes more than half, I think, or maybe just about half of all the world's World Heritage sites. So you think about information coming in from over 500 World Heritage sites. So they can really only look at the big picture and the trends. It's not really designed to be a very granular kind of assessment of each individual World Heritage site. I think if you're interested in that sort of thing, I might mention that IUCN does its own World Heritage Outlook report, which is just focused on the natural properties on the World Heritage List. And in my mind, that's a more detailed kind of report. You can zoom in on individual World Heritage sites, and they give you a snapshot of, from their perspective, how well the outstanding universal values of the site are faring. And so that's available on the IUCN World Heritage webpage. I think the most recent one was issued just a couple of years ago. The Outlook reports, I believe, are on a shorter cycle. I think they're every 5 years or something. So, that's also, adds to, I think, more accuracy, perhaps, or well, at least more timely information.
We have another question here, Steve. How are the effects of World Heritage sites due to U.S. presence in other parts of the world, for many reasons, including defense purposes, monitored and reported? I think the one obvious example that we're dealing with right now is a site on the U.S.-Mexican border, the Pinacate World Heritage Site, which has, as we all know, there's a major new border wall that bisects, well, not the site itself, but it's U.S. protected areas in Arizona with the Mexican World Heritage Site just across the border. And so we've been asked to work with Mexico to understand what the potential impacts on the OUV of the Mexican site may be, and then also think about what we might do to mitigate those impacts. So we are, and Steve also talked about the Mexican butterfly on the Monarch Reserve. But outside of that, Steve, I can't think of other examples where, U.S. presence in other parts of the world, has been an issue for the World Heritage Committee.
There's only one other one I can think of, which took place a number of years ago. I think it was a U.S. Navy ship that ran aground on a reef in the Philippines. And as I recall, that did not come into play in terms of World Heritage. I think it was handled on a bilateral basis between the U.S. government and the Philippines. So it's been relatively, I guess I would say, this is not an issue that has really come up very often outside of perhaps the US, Mexico, or US, Canada context. There was a question in the chat about what involvement does ICOMOS have with the Open Heritage Program, if any interest? And I don't know how to answer that question. Perhaps Destry or somebody from US ICOMOS could respond to that one.
This is Destry. I don't even know what Open Heritage is, frankly.
Okay. Well,
This is Christine. That may be, I think, part of Elizabeth Lee from SCI-Arc's presentation. I think she's going to touch on Open Heritage as well. That's tomorrow during the forum session. And then Chris Polglace, of course, as we talk about IUCN, he'll be touching on that as well. So just wanted to close that loop. But I do think Liz is going to talk a little bit about Open Heritage, and I'll flag that for her since there's interest and we have a question.
Well, I'll take advantage one more time of having the floor here. And I mentioned at the beginning that World Heritage is basically what you make of it. And just before the pandemic, we helped produce, along with the Harper's Ferry Center, a brand new Unigrid brochure on World Heritage sites in the United States. And so if you all at your sites do not have this and would like it, please let us know. I think this is a great way to show, promote the World Heritage Destination, not just at your site, but to remind folks that, you're part of both a national and really ultimately a global network of these sites.
and while we're promoting products of our office, I might mention that we have the US World Heritage Junior Ranger program as well, which we'd like to encourage all the US World Heritage sites to use and adapt to their own sites. We have a number, including at San Antonio Missions, where they're doing some stuff with that, but it's available on our Office of International Affairs webpage, and we'd be happy to share it with any and all of you.
Jonathan, so we have a couple minutes, and I've received a couple of private messages, so I'm going to bring them out into the sunshine. And really, some of it is about the periodic reporting. I think, working through when we have, when we have threats to sites, when there are risks, how we talk about that, and how that's kind of vetted through the process. Can you talk a little bit about, how U.S. World Heritage sites can best capture that information? And if they have a question about how to respond, who is are you the right person in the Office of International Affairs to kind of check in with about how to frame some of those, whether it's urban encroachment, San Antonio, whether it's oil and gas, Chaco, how we frame those within the context of periodic reporting, knowing that it's more of a questionnaire. I think there are some concerns about the brevity of that, and because some of these issues are so complex. And if you can speak to that in more detail, I think it sounds like there are a number of people who are really interested in getting into some of those details, even during this discussion, to kind of hear your thoughts.
Right. Thank you. Well, so yes, I am technically the focal point, the national focal point, but of course that just simply means that these questions first come to me first, but then work with our office, with Steve, and if necessary, leadership of the Park Service or the department. It really depends on the issue, but I think there's an opportunity. You can answer, of course, very briefly, but my understanding is most of these have there's a mechanism where you can put much more detailed responses even into the questionnaire. So if you want to get that context out there, and whether or not that's ultimately something that the center itself will take advantage of, I'm sort of skeptical, because they're going to be looking at literally hundreds and hundreds of these reports from all across the region. But I think it could be useful for you at the site, but also to be able to see over time how we may be addressing these challenges. I don't know, what do you think, Steve?
Oh, I agree. And I think for detailed responses on threats, I think the reactive monitoring process or the other kinds of reporting that you covered, John, are probably like a more appropriate vehicle for discussing those kinds of threats. I mean, San Antonio is a case in point. We have had many, many inquiries about threats to the missions. Christine, even before you started in the park, and I'm sure you've been made aware of all of the correspondence going back and forth on the Alamo Plaza and a number of other developments. And so I think that process is really more suited to get into the weeds on some of these threats.
Thanks, that helps. And I think it helps for folks just to know that they can, shouldn't hesitate to reach out to you. I think Jonathan is the first stop for, I don't know how to answer this question. Here's the scenario. And I think it's, super complicated in some instances where we have, and I think there was a comment in the chat about this as well, where we've got, sites that are in the middle of urban environments, historic, towns. I mean, using San Antonio, we're an urban immersed National Park Service unit and World Heritage Site in the 7th largest city in the United States, with all of the challenges and all of the opportunities that come with that. And we have this interesting management framework. I mean, I serve on the Alamo Citizens Advisory Committee, helping to kind of figure out what's happening with Alamo Plaza. We have a great collaboration with the city, which we'll talk about during the panel session for San Antonio tomorrow, but with all the different partners and individual missions and pushing and pulling and, economic development and all those things, it's a challenge. And how we frame that for reporting purposes, and even getting to consensus on it is important. I do see a question in the chat. It says one of the important heritage sites is the historic center of the cities and historic towns. Has ICOMOS, and maybe Destry, this might be a question for you, has ICOMOS had any involvement with the registration and protection of them? We might need some clarification about the specific site. Destry, I don't know if you can.
I'll jump in actually, Christine,
okay,
before Destry does. There are quite a few historic towns and cities on the World Heritage List. In fact, the very first World Heritage Site was the historic city of Quito, Ecuador. So the very first site was a historic town, Spanish colonial settlement in Ecuador. In the United States, other than maybe San Antonio, and we have Independence Hall in Philadelphia, which is a single building, we do not have historic towns or cities on the World Heritage List, and that has to do with the stipulation in the National Historic Preservation Act that requires 100% of the property owners included in a nomination to give their consent to have their property included, and they have to do that in writing, and they have to pledge to preserve their property in perpetuity. So that's an awfully high bar. We've never been able to nominate historic towns and cities in the US to the World Heritage List. We did at one point before John and I were involved. The Historic Center of Savannah was nominated by the US, and to kind of get around the requirement for all the property owners to give their consent. The nomination consisted of it was really the plan, the historic 18th century plan for the city with the streets and the squares, the publicly owned property basically, but ICOMOS did not accept that. They said that they needed to, in order to be a World Heritage Site, all the historic fabric of the core needed to be included, which made it a non-starter from our perspective, given the requirements of the law. But that's unusual. Most other countries do not have a requirement like that. And so, for example, in Canada, Quebec City is a historic town that's on the World Heritage List. Lunenburg in Nova Scotia is a historic town on the World Heritage List. So we are the outlier in the world on this. Cindy is mentioning Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Thanks for that question, Cindy. We are working on a nomination for the Moravian settlement in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. It's a National Historic Landmark District. And thankfully, everybody in the Moravian Church, which owns most of the buildings, the city of Bethlehem owns part of the National Historic Landmark District, and there's one private property owner, the Moravian University. So it's a manageable number of owners, and they're all very much in support of this nomination, which is going to be part of a multi-country nomination, including sites in Denmark, Germany, and the UK and Northern Ireland. It'll be the first multinational nomination, serial nomination that the US has been a part of. and we're finalizing the document right now. It's actually been sent to the World Heritage Center for the technical review, and hopefully we'll nominate it early next year.
Stephen, you bring up a good question though. And I think this is an opportunity. I know we've got about 6 minutes left of this session, which has been really popular. I think the discussion is valuable, but I've been in touch myself with the folks at Historic Bethlehem. And, I think the network and sharing kind of how things work sometimes between sites is some of the most important, for example, here in San Antonio, how do we keep that separation between the National Park Service, and the Archdiocese? What is that? How does that play out on the ground? Because it's one thing to have a site inscribed, and then it's another going forward to manage it. What do you see as other opportunities for World Heritage Site managers or prospective sites to connect with each other on this issue? Is that something that your office would be willing to kind of facilitate, a best practices or anything like that?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think to some degree, all these sites are quite unique. The situation in San Antonio is probably the most complicated from a management standpoint. As you pointed out, Christine, there's at least 5 entities that have a stake as essentially our owners, if you will, of the various properties included in the nomination. That's fairly unusual. Bethlehem approaches it, but not really to the same degree. We have the Frank Lloyd Wright sites, which are owned by multiple different entities, but they have a very organized kind of overarching body through the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy, which acts as their agent, and they have a system where they work through they have a World Heritage Council that's part of the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy. And so, but I do think that there might be some opportunities for sites like that with multiple ownerships where the Park Service, may not even be involved at all, which is the case with Frank Lloyd Wright. I mean, we don't have any National Park Service units included in that nomination. But that could be an area to explore. What are the commonalities? What are the common issues that we're facing? And, whether it's how do we report or how do we promote, that's a whole nother area. But
so I think also in the past, Steve, we've tried to establish like a community of practice for the World Heritage Site managers. And again, I think that would be if we could help do that, but ultimately it's up to the managers to determine this is something that they want to use, right? And I think, it got pretty limited use in the past, but if that's something that folks would find helpful and interesting, we could certainly look with others in the Park Service outside to see what would be a better mechanism platform for doing that.
I think, what we've learned during the pandemic is we can get a lot accomplished over Teams and Zoom, and maybe we should think about starting like an open forum for managers to meet on I don't know, quarterly or twice a year or something, and just have an open agenda for what the managers would want to talk about.
Steve, I would add one point to your good point about the complexity of diverse ownerships, and that is it will come up for certain when the serial nomination of civil rights movement sites is on the table for consideration, because there are so many sites in so many places. First of all, picking among them, and second of all, recognizing that many of the most important ones are not currently anyway in federal ownership, and figuring out how that can be managed and defined will be a challenge due to that complexity.
Right.
Well, thank you both so much. This was a fantastically informative session and really, really great conversation. We next on the agenda, as folks turn on and off cameras and set things up, our next session is focused on climate change impacts specifically to U.S. World Heritage. And so we have Myrna Palfrey, who is the superintendent. Hi, Myrna, for San Juan in Puerto Rico. Philip Hooge, we've heard from a little bit already. He's from Glacier Bay. And then Amanda Boyd, and I'm going to do my darndest to continue to pronounce Papahanaumokuakea. So thank you all so much for that really great session. And this should be a pretty seamless transition with presentations and things. But for those of you who are participants, will give us just a minute to get presentations up and running. Thanks a bunch.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm Myrna Palfrey from San Juan National Historic Site. So really excited to be here this morning, and I want to thank Christine Jacobs and Destry Jarvis for the invitation and for allowing me to speak about San Juan National Historic Site. And what I would like to do is talk to you a little bit about what we have done and what we plan, the actions that we have planned as we move forward with meeting the many challenges that are ahead of us due to climate change. Okay, so let's talk about important milestones. And what I want to highlight here, so we were established as a National Historic Site in 1949, and it was in 1983 that we received designation as a World Heritage Site. And it included not only the park, but also La Fortaleza, which is the governor's mansion. So in 2016, there were some minor adjustments made to the heritage site property. And really, it just included addition of several historic sections of historic walls, several bastions, and the esplanade of El Morro, which is, and you'll see that in a minute, large green areas in front of one of the forts. And these changes really, they really did complete the World Heritage Site property. They were necessary and just to complete the site property. I also want to highlight here, 1995, El Paseo del Morro National Recreation Trail was constructed at a cost of about 40 million. And I just wanted to highlight this one because this trail, which surrounds the fort of El Morro, right on the coastline, is a very significant project in that it directly addresses the vulnerability of the fort against climate change due to erosion. Okay, next one, please. So where are we located? Puerto Rico, small island within the Caribbean hurricane belt, which is, we have a 6-month hurricane season from June 1st to November 30th. The island itself is about 100 miles long by 35 miles wide. It's a very small island, but it has about 300 miles of coastline. So climate change and sea level rise are significant concerns. We're surrounded in the northeast by Atlantic Ocean and in the southwest by the Caribbean Sea. Next slide, please. So here you have an aerial view of the islet of San Juan. You can see the islet here, attached or accessible to the mainland through this Dos Hermanos Bridge. So where is the park or the World Heritage Site? So it begins about here. This area here is one of the forts, San Cristobal Fort. You have a wall, which a historic wall, the North Wall. The North Wall begins, and the North Wall, it continues, does not continue on the coastline here. The North Wall continues here. It goes through this area and then back out to the coastline. And this is Fort El Morro. Fort El Morro. This that you see here is that trail I was telling you about, was constructed in 1995, Paseo del Morro. Park jurisdiction and the World Heritage Site continues around here. And around here, and we'll see it a little bit better in a couple of pictures here, is La Fortaleza, which is the governor's mansion. And then, and this is also, there's also historic walls all around here, all along the perimeter here. Those historic walls. And then there is a gate or a door, the historic doors, the historic gates. There were 3 originally that were used, the doors that entered by the Spaniards used to enter the old city. The gate of San Juan is around here, and that's also part of San Juan National Historic Site. And the site then continues, and around here it goes back in. This would be considered our southern historic walls. And in this area, then the park and World Heritage Site jurisdiction ends about here. There's several bastions in the historic, the southern portion of the historic walls. So it goes all through here, all through here, all through here, up to here. Crossing the San Juan Bay, you have this island. This island is called Goat Island, Isla de Cabras. And on Goat Island, there's a small fort right here. It's 14 San Juan de la Cruz. It's known as El Cañuelo. This is also part of the national park and of the World Heritage Site. And we'll see a little bit more about this right now. Next slide. Isla de Cabras, Goat Island. Hit it one more time and we should get another layer of information. Okay, so this is Isla de Cabras, and this here is the fort known as El Cañuelo. You can hit it one more time. I think there's another layer. There you go. So the shoreline at the beach of El Cañuelo, no, go back. The shoreline at the beach of El Cañuelo and around the fort has experienced significant erosional issues, as you can see, and loss of shoreline and beach width. You'll see here the loss of shoreline from 1994 to 2003 and 2020. Next slide, please. So what is the historic site composed of? You have Fort El Morro with, as we talked about, the trail here, Paseo del Morro. These green areas is the esplanade. The esplanade or esplanade that was added to the World Heritage Site in 2016. It's about 35 acres. This is Castillo San Cristobal, the other fort. It just additional information, Castillo San Cristobal is the largest fortification in the national park system. And historic walls, such as this one, we have 2.7 miles of historic walls surrounding the city. This that you see here is the San Juan Gate, the original gate of San Juan, or the first one where the Spanish built. This is the first gate into the city. This that you sort of can see a little bit here, that is La Fortaleza, the governor's mansion, which is, the wall continues through here. This is also a historic wall past La Fortaleza. And this last picture here, you have El Morro, Fort El Morro, San Juan Bay, and this is Goat Island, Isla de Cabra, and Fort El Cañuelo. And Fort El Cañuelo, and you can tell here a little bit, the fort is approximately 3 feet above mean sea level. And it is, of course, subject to coastal flooding. It is the park asset with the greatest exposure and likely the highest vulnerability. Okay, next slide, please. So what have we done so far? So because we're a coastal park, there has been a push for a more systematic approach to the challenges of climate change. I'm going to mention 2 of the most important accomplishments. Participation in the Climate Friendly Parks Program and the completion of the Coastal Hazards and Sea Level Rise Asset Vulnerability Assessment. Next slide. So the focus of the Climate Friendly Parks Program was on addressing how to further integrate sustainability into park operations. So looking at the impacts of our operations on the environment and how we can minimize our contribution to climate change. Next slide, please. So the park wanted to better understand how we could improve our operation to reduce our carbon footprint. And these here are the main areas of the program that the park wanted to address at that time. To reduce carbon footprint and waste was the focus. So many lessons learned. One of the main lessons learned from the program was our introduction to the concept of vulnerability assessment as it related to climate change and our need to complete a thorough assessment. We desperately needed a thorough assessment. Other things we learned that island-wide, Puerto Rico-wide, the cultural institutions did not have a clear understanding of climate change risk or effects. So Puerto Rico really needed to engage in risk identification and assessment plan. And they have. They've moved forward in many fronts with that. And another key message that we got out of the Climate Friendly Parks program, climate change is already impacting the park, and it's important for the park to start acting now to secure funds and to protect the shoreline, especially around El Morro, to prevent further collapses and weakening of the walls. Next slide, please. So our red and yellow map. So this map will show a 50-year projection of inundation. It shows that both the yellow and the red areas are going to be inundated. The yellow areas would be subject to inundation by the 1% annual chance flood event. The red areas also would be inundated by the 1% flood event and also by additional hazards due to storm-induced velocity wave action. And if you can see, so this would be Fort San Cristobal area. See that whole coastline, how high the inundation rate would reach. This is El Morro, Paseo, Fortaleza. And you can see Goat Island, Isla de Cabras, completely inundated. Next slide, please. So coastal hazards and sea level rise asset vulnerability assessment. So we learned that we needed to dig deeper and complete a more detailed assessment. So the assessment is science-based, and it was our first approach, our first look at the vulnerabilities associated with climate change in the park. So going in, we understood that it wasn't a perfect, not a perfect tool, and we do need more detailed data. For example, let me just, two flaws of the assessment. It only considered park assets within the park, things within the park, and it left out the roads leading to the park. And remember, we're on an islet, and these roads are located in areas that have severe erosion problems. Parts of the city flood easily, and so it basically means that there's no access to the site. And that was not taken as a factor in the vulnerability assessment or in the ratings. And also, when you look at the forts, San Cristobal and El Morro, Fort El Morro was given one rating for the entire fort. The fort has 6 levels. And we understood that the lower levels, the floating battery, for example, would be more severely impacted than the higher levels, the 6th level. But due to the way the data was entered, the data that we had available was entered, the rating, it had one rating. It just had one rating for the entire fort. Fort San Cristobal did not, it had variants. Next one, please. So these were the coastal hazards that were assessed for determining our vulnerability. Sea level rise, inundation, potential coastal flooding, storm surge, erosion and shoreline change, and historical past flooding information. Next one, please. So what were the results? The results were that we had 6 of our buildings were categorized as high vulnerability, and 3 had moderate vulnerability. So the 6 that have high vulnerability were El Cañuelo. It was the highest, it received the highest vulnerability rating. And in San Cristobal area, you have the Devil's Sentry Box, La Princesa Battery, and Santa Teresa Bastion. And then there were 2 other bastions near, moving this way further and over here, that received also Santa Elena Bastion and San Agustin Bastion. Those 6 areas received the highest rating for vulnerability. Next slide. So 9 out of our 35 buildings, or 25% of our buildings, received high or moderate vulnerability ratings. And among these was El Cañuelo, which, as you saw, would be completely inundated the island. So as you all know, these buildings are integral parts of the fortification system and are contributing to the outstanding universal value that gives the historic site its character as a World Heritage Site. Next one, please. The assessment also looked at roads, and for us, we don't have roads, we have trails. It looked at the Paseo del Morro Trail and the Recinto Oeste Trail. And both of them, which is a little bit a smaller portion of the trail, both of them rated as moderate. And so remember, the assessment also, since it didn't take into consideration the other roads leading to the park, it's a little bit, the transportation infrastructure is a little bit misleading because of that. Okay, next one, please. So this is El Cañuelo on Isla de Cabras. El Cañuelo rated as our most vulnerable asset. So during the hurricane season of 2017, multiple storms impacted El Cañuelo. That would have included Hurricane Maria, causing shoreline scouring and washout in multiple locations. The washed out areas immediately threaten the fort and are progressively losing landmass each year. Next one, please. So as you can see, these are the existing conditions after the storm. It's deplorable, as these are the roads coming in. This is the fort here. The road system coming in. This right here is the fort. This is immediately adjacent to the fort. Road system. Extremely high level of erosion. Next one, please. So we have initiated work on a project for the shoreline protection system at El Cañuelo. The project is for approximately $2.1 million and includes installation along here of a 400 linear foot rock revetment, and that will allow us to regain approximately 20 to 40 feet of shoreline. Around this area here, we are going to create an earthen berm around the fort, just around this area and a little bit over here, at a crest elevation of 6 feet above mean sea level. And around here, also around here and here, we're going to elevate about 15,000 square feet of surrounding land to 5 feet above mean sea level. And development of this project took into consideration climate change and sea level rise estimates, and is expected to have at least a 25-year design life. And we're at the stage right now, all the permits have finally been received, and we are going out in the bidding process for the contractor, for selection of a contractor. So this is happening already. Next one, please. San Fernando Bastion. So the west shore of El Morro is highly exposed to gravitational erosion caused by height, wind, constant rain, salinity, and wave action. We had a failure of this cliff. This is the cliff that supports the bastion. So it did have a failure of the cliff on 2 occasions, in 2012 and later in 2017. And in 2012, repeated episodes of torrential rain caused a rock slide at the bastion, which forms part of the support of the Castillo's esplanade, which sits on top of it. Loose debris, including boulders as large as 5 feet wide by 7 feet long, catapulted down the slope to land beside the Paseo del Morro. So you see the Paseo is right underneath the cliff. In 2017, a smaller portion, but a portion of the bastion also failed, and it took a little bit of the perimeter fencing that surrounded the bastion. So what are we doing? If you look at this picture, this was done in around 1994, 1995. About 75% of the cliff. This portion here is this part here that you can't see, but it goes in there. That's this portion. This is the portion that we have to complete the treatment for. What we're looking for is to do this same treatment on this portion of the cliff. It has been proven to be a highly effective treatment requiring little to no maintenance or repairs for the 27, 28 years of its existence. And the project is going to finalize the stabilization of the cliff in a way that provides consistency for viewshed purposes. And what it is, this is an application of shotcrete, and that's like the pneumatical application of concrete. And it's worked wonderfully, and it will stabilize this. And this project is also going to contracting, and it's received the permits, and we are ready to move forward. This was 8.4 million. Next one, please. Okay, wall injections. And they're not doing wall injections. I just wanted to show the wall here and drainage on an esplanade here. But so we have an approved project to conduct wall injections to the historic walls. We know there's numerous water and air pockets throughout the walls. And this project would look at the soil behind the walls to identify water and air pockets in the soil. The project would entail using ground penetrating radar to identify voids in the soil. And if major pockets are identified, then the contractor would drill small holes in the wall to release water and insert a grout to fill in the voids and support the interior of the wall. There's approximately 11 million cubic feet of masonry in the 2.7 miles of historic walls in the 3 forts. Next, please. And so outstanding projects. So the first one is the completion of the Paseo del Morro Trail. And so we continue to pursue LRF, we call it Legacy Restoration Funds. They're the Great American Outdoors Act funding to protect the coastal assets and fortifications is the name of this project. It's to extend and finalize, complete the trail. The trail really, the final stages of this project, as it was initially created, would take the paseo from El Morro all the way through to the second fort, to Fort San Cristobal. It would create a pedestrian non-motorized access trail beneficial to visitors and residents alike. Now, it is a complex project. There are several jurisdictional layers within this area. They're all governmental agencies and all are on board and very interested in furthering this project. The Park Service has received letters of support for this project and everybody is on board. Of course, we're pursuing funding. And then finally, we know we need to do a further assessment. And we are in conversations with the NCPTT, the National Center for Preservation, Technology and Training, to complete this more in-depth assessment of the park resources. So
Myrna, sorry to interrupt, Myrna, this is Christina. I just wanted to do a quick time check. I know you've got, I think, a couple slides left. And
no, this is the last one. We have one more, Christina.
Oh, okay. Okay, awesome. No, it's just such a great presentation. I just saw Philip turn his camera on.
I got to talking.
It's amazing. I just wanted to help with that transition.
Okay.
Sorry for interrupting.
Okay, so no, I just so I wanted to end my presentation just with some final thoughts that are probably thoughts that all of us as stewards of these World Heritage sites that have been entrusted to us, we probably all have these. I tend to ponder on this third bullet. Our challenges are real. Mitigating climate change is costly, and there remains much more to learn. So in San Juan, we just try to continue moving forward, stabilizing our assets, and continuously learning about the climate process and its effects. And so that is my presentation. I hope you all enjoyed it and come visit San Juan. Thank you all.
Myrna, that was great. I know we've got a question, it looks like, from Jan Balsam, and then we're going to turn it over to Philip as well.
Yeah, Myrna, it's really interesting. And I'm just wondering how the community around you is engaged with the efforts that you're making right now.
Jan, that's a great question. And it's part of the success and why they're all singing in our choir. The community loves the park, has great relationships. And one of the reasons is through historically, okay, so throughout the years that the park has been there, the preservation crew that works on treating the historic walls throughout San Juan, they really go above and beyond to train community groups to learn how to treat these walls, how to do the mixture of the components to the historic wall to match the historic fabric as close as possible. And we get youth groups and just all kinds of different work groups from the community and teach them. And we're trying, and through the years, this has been really a success story way before I even began in this area. And it goes through with the different governmental agencies also. They recognize the park as experts in the preservation of the historic walls and the fortifications, but also as they see that the park shares that wealth and that knowledge and wants to be a partner in this with the community. So they are really, really supportive of the park. Great question. Thank you, Jan.
Yeah, great question, Jan. Thanks a bunch. All right, Philip, from Glacier Bay, where it's practically the middle of the night still. Thank you for joining us. And we'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
No, it's the morning. I see the dawn coming up, right now. Does everybody see my screen fine right now?
Yep.
Okay.
Loud and clear.
So thank you all. I'm Philip Hooge. I'm superintendent here at Glacier Bay, and started out my career once as a scientist here before moving on to management. Today I'm going to share with you 3 examples of climate change at Glacier Bay. There's many others, but these stand out as examples of different classes of challenges. Let me see if I can advance slides. Okay, so first, I wanted to mention that Glacier Bay is just one piece of 4 of the world's largest terrestrial World Heritage Site. The Kalani, Wrangell, St. Elias, Glacier Bay, Tachincini, Alsek World Heritage Site, quite a mouthful. Glacier Bay, while sharing many similarities in the upper elevations, is unique in having marine jurisdiction. And the challenges that I'll present to you are representative of that terrestrial marine interface. Please forgive me for just focusing on Glacier Bay. The vast areas represented in this World Heritage Sites, which could fit the 10 largest lower 48 parks, are too much without just going into a whole session on this with all the managers. So first, a short description of Glacier Bay. Glacier Bay is characterized by being a large fjord within a very high 5,000 meter mountain range and was just recently deglaciated in the last century. It's a land characterized by change and has had numerous glacial processes of advancing, lasting thousands of years and retreats over hundreds. We've counted up to 8 of those in the last 3,000 years, or 30,000 years. Those advances and retreats were independent of recent climate warming, but they've now been amplified by them. This slide shows the last glacial retreat and the ice at various stages in time. So, and here's an example of the Carroll Glacier retreating kind of before 1906 and 2004. And, oops, I don't know why it happened. Okay, and the Muir Glacier in 1891 and 2005. So the first challenge is one of rapid debuttressing by the glacier. And this is debuttressing means being lack of support, and the retreat. And glaciers, when they come in, they take V-shaped valleys and they turn them into steep side U-shaped valleys. Yosemite is a great example of that. Well, Glacier Bay, we often think of tidal waves, I guess, in these off these faults these plate faults and them, going across oceans. But actually, the very largest tidal waves have occurred in Southeast Alaska, and the very largest one was the Lituya slide in the 1950s. And in this area, basically a debuttressed wall with a retreating glacier fell down and created a 1,500-foot wave, 1,500 feet. So, and there's many more examples of these types of slopes in Glacier Bay. Here's an example of one in Tidal Inlet, called the Tidal Inlet Slope. And this is a simulation of what would happen if that went off. And just the short Cliff Notes story is that in 10 minutes there would be, or less than 10 minutes, there would be a 300-foot wave that would cross the entire main travel channel in Glacier Bay, and then reflect back and forth over a wide range of time, slowly decreasing in size, but be pretty massive. And here's another great example. This about 2 years ago, this slide occurred on the Lamplugh Glacier. This is of immense size. This is about 10 times larger than what would slide at tidal, and about 4 times larger than what happened at Lituya. And to give you a kind of a scale, that's about 25 kilometers long of debris and about 10 kilometers wide and about 10 meters high of debris. And that came within a few kilometers of the ocean. The ocean, I just wish the picture was back a little bit, just a little bit in the corner of the picture, you would see the glacial front right there and the ocean. So, one can just imagine if that hit. And 2 weeks ago, this slid again, a massive slide, but about half that size, going right on top of this other slide here. So, I put this up just to show that, boats tip over in waves, and this is seaworthy boats. The usual general rule of thumb is that if a wave comes that's equal to your beam, you're going to go over. For cruise ships can only tilt about 30 degrees before they go over. And in Glacier Bay, over the last 20 years, cruise ships have just been getting larger and larger and larger, and in a sense less stable. And now they're small cities, 5,000 passengers and guests on there. So there's a lot of concern to understand the pattern of these landslide slopes and what type of waves they would generate, and whether there was anything the Park Service could do to help with this situation. For example, a tidal inlet, we've talked about that 10 minutes, and with an early warning network, a boat can go from facing from sideways, hitting it on the beam, to turning and facing it on the bow, which can make a dramatic difference. So that's kind of a rather kind of spectacular example of climate change. And here, so another one more subtle is, the park and its enabling legislation has it enshrined in the purpose that the easy access by normal means, which means like cruise ships or tour boats or steamships at that time, to the glacial environment, to the tidewater glaciers. We're lucky right now, we have multiple tidewater glaciers that these boats can come up to. But the boats are not allowed to go for much of the year into one area, Johns Hopkins Inlet. And the reason that is because of a substantial portion of Alaska's population of harbor seals breeds at that location. And the ice is just a perfect place to breed. It is, seals can get out on it, get back into the water. The actual debris, the little bubbles that are caused by the glacier calving and the other glacial debris actually heavily interfere with underwater acoustics for killer whales and other predators. So right now, so pretty soon the park will be faced with a situation where the protections that we have for harbor seals, which far exceed the NOAA restrictions or those things that we're absolutely legally required to do, you know, we're going to have to loosen up on those in order to be able to meet our primary purpose of glacial access. John Hopkins will be one of the tidewater glaciers, which is advancing right now, and are still advancing, and probably will be for decades after many of the other glaciers stop. So the next example I wanted to give here was seawater temperature. And, you know, the park has been doing 30 years of oceanography, and it's also been doing 38 years of monitoring populations of whales with individual recognition. And so we're in very good position to look at and see a dramatic change in the in sea temperatures, which occurred with what the common name in the literature was the blob, the ocean blob. And this seawater anomaly also reached into Glacier Bay, and we saw rather, as with other areas across the Gulf of Alaska, we saw rather dramatic impacts. And in fact, we lost over 60% of our whale population. We weren't sure at that time if they were lost, but actually now multiple years later, to 2022, we still haven't seen these individuals, and they were like clockwork coming here and individually recognized. So we're assuming these were mortality events. And we got to see some of the effects on condition in these whales. So this, this also, during this time period, we also saw the death of thousands of seabirds, which washed up on the shore here, and some other very large changes. So, this is a good example of kind of these broader scale impacts that then kind of reach into the park. With the discussion on the situation in in Puerto Rico, I wanted to mention, the one thing we don't have to worry about here at Glacier Bay is sea level rise, and that's because of the weight of the ice. 2,000 feet of ice pushed down the land, and for the next 400 or so years, the rate of uplift, or what they call isostatic rebound, will exceed the predicted sea level rises here. So that's we're grateful for that. But we have many other challenges that I didn't mention here, like ocean acidification, for example. But I think that with that, my time is up here, and there may be a minute for questions.
Well, unless there are any questions, and if they come in, we can also address them after Dan's talk. But
actually, Christine, I would like to ask a question. Sorry to jump in.
Absolutely.
I guess my question would be to Philip and also to Myrna, really, is to what extent does the World Heritage status of your parks play a role in addressing these climate change impacts, or do you think that it could play a role? Does it make a difference?
Well, I mean, I'll give you one example. It's ironic, besides the cruise ship things that we share with our sister park, that we joined with after our meeting in our World Heritage meetings. But West Norwegian Fjords also has pretty much some of this exact same concerns with debuttressing and slides. And so we've been, we share ideas on solutions back and forth for dealing with this issue. And in fact, if you want to watch a great movie, you can watch Volgan the Wave, and that's in West Norwegian Fjord. So that's what happens when cruise ship and waves mix.
Great, and thank you for the question. There's another question in the chat, Philip. I think this is for you. I'm not sure if you can see it. It sounds like they're asking if there's been a change of course, I think, for your collaborating sites.
A change in course. I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand what. The ALSEC. Yeah, that's another one of these significant climate change challenges that I didn't even mention. But one of the major rivers in Glacier Bay, the international river, is there's substantial recent evidence that it may dramatically on the U.S. side change its entire drainage, moving 20 or 30 kilometers south, completely out of the preserve. A rather dramatic example that could affect. It probably won't, given the grade that is occurring, it probably won't affect the international rafting opportunities that we manage jointly with Canada, but it will probably require a huge change in the kind of the logistical pickup from a different location. But it dramatically affects the preserve and the whole purpose of the preserve at the park. Good question.
That's great, Philip. Thanks a bunch. All right, it is my great pleasure also now. We're going to pivot to our third site under this session. We have Dr. Dan Polhemus with us, who works with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife in Hawaii and is a site manager at Papahanaumokuakea. I'm going to get it before the end of the forum. Pretty close. So anyway, Dan, take it away. Thank you so much for joining us. I know it's really early where you are.
Here goes the screen share. We'll try it. Okay, I'm going to talk to you about climate change in Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument, a World Heritage Site. I'm going to go very fast, and so if people have questions, catch me with email or chat later. Papahanaumokuakea occupies the northwestern 2/3 of the Hawaiian archipelago. It's 1,200 miles long. It was designated as a World Heritage Site in 2010. It consists of 10 of 2 high islands and about 8 atolls. It's one of the largest fully protected marine conservation areas on Earth, 583,000 square miles. It's larger than all the national parks combined in the United States. We have lots of biodiversity. We have 140 native Hawaiian cultural sites and some of the best preserved shallow water shipwrecks in the world. So it's a joint natural and cultural World Heritage Site, and as noted, was designated in 2010. It's located in the middle of the Northern Pacific. It's extremely remote. It's basically 2,500 miles from anywhere in the shortest direction. So it's really out there. The problem is that's not divorced from the rest of the planet. And as we know, the planet has been changing. And here's carbon dioxide as recorded at the Mauna Loa Observatory elsewhere in Hawaii. We've had a 33% increase over 64 years. So that in turn has generated differences in how the planet heats up now. And not only that, we're continuing to put more in. So as it looks like right now, it seems unlikely that we're going to stay under 2 degrees centigrade targets unless we change our behavior rather radically. The result is that across the board, temperatures have been rising on land and sea. And this is the chart going back for 142 years. And you can see that the last 8 years were the warmest on record in that entire long record. And so we've definitely been getting warmer, and we've been in many cases setting hottest year ever records successively back to back. So this is the problem, is that all of this hits the monument. Rising air and sea temperatures create thermal stresses for our marine and terrestrial biodiversity. Rising sea levels threaten to inundate our islands. We have a higher incidence of severe storms and wave action, changes in precipitation, which are basically drying us out, and changing ocean chemistry, which is changing calcification of our corals. If you look at global mean surface temperature, it's obviously gone up rather dramatically. Trends in the monument are uncertain because we really don't have good baseline data. We don't have long-term recording stations here, but we have been able to basically assume that what's happening in the main Hawaiian Islands further to the southeast is also playing out in the Northwesterns, and that is a long-term and increasing rise in air temperatures. Sea surface temperature mirrors this. Essentially, these are the trends for about the last 140 years, and you can see that once again, we were fairly steady for about a century, and then there was a rapid decoupling and rise, starting particularly around the mid-1990s. And these trends are not just uniform across the globe. So you can see that you are here oval, and what it shows you is that we've got essentially higher rise in sea level right where the monument is. So that means that down in the main Hawaiian Islands, which you can actually see as a little blob down there, yes, we're rising, but we're rising faster up in the sector around Midway and Kure at the far northwestern end of our monument. This varies according to both ENSO cycles and broader cycles. This is the ENSO index, which is the El Nino and La Nina sort of alternation. We're in the third year of a La Nina right now, which is interesting because they rarely last that long. Normally, we get significant coral bleaching during El Ninos, the last one being 2015. At this point, this year, we're bleaching in a La Nina, which is a new and somewhat disturbing trend. Also, we have a broader cycle called the Pacific Decadal Oscillation that tends to run on multi-decadal cycles, actually. And so we've been shifting to a warmer phase around 2020, and this would probably serve to only amplify heating effects in the monument for about the next decade to 15 years at least. Rising ocean temperatures lead to increasing ocean heat content and coral bleaching. We never really recorded coral bleaching in Hawaii until about 20 years ago. Now it is a relatively regular occurrence, happens about every 3 to 4 years. Being further north, the monument has colder winters, but also warmer summers. It's more temperate. So bleaching actually started there first, okay, although it now occurs throughout the Hawaiian chain on a periodic basis. And you can see sometimes the effects of this are fairly severe. At Lysianski back in 2014, 2015, we lost essentially almost 90% of our, or plus 90% of our coral cover on the east side of the atoll. So we went from 70% coral cover to 1% coral cover in the space of 12 months. So this is rather a problem. And once again, such events are predicted to become more frequent. The thought is, based on modeling, that every pixel globally that contains coral will probably bleach to some degree or another, perhaps not fatally, but at least to some degree by 2050. So this is a problem that is not going away. If you look at sea level rise, it may not be a problem at Glacier Bay, but it's certainly a problem in the monument. In our monument in general, it's going up close to the global average, about 3.5 millimeters a year. We have 2 tide gauges, one at Midway and one at French Frigate Shoals. The Midway gauge has 74 years of record. So we have a pretty accurate idea of the fact that yes, our sea level is coming up. It's continuing to rise. And this creates potential impacts to our terrestrial systems and to some of our historic properties. Global sea level rise is projected to continue to rise and in fact possibly accelerate. At the moment, all the scenarios that we have exceed current rates. So it means that sea level rise is going to come up even faster over time. It's just a question of how fast. But the point is that at least we're going to get 1.5 meters potentially of additional rise by 2100 at our current emission scenarios. That's a lot of rise. That's about 4 feet. And once again, it's not evenly distributed, just like temperature. It turns out that it's more extreme up at the northwestern end of the monument, where Midway and Kure are, less extreme down in the main Hawaiian Islands, but it's still rising everywhere. So nobody's immune to this. There's been tendency to look at sea level rise as simply pulling up the water and looking at it as a bathtub model. This is Laysan, which is a secondary elevated atoll up in the northwestern part of the chain, down from Midway a bit. But when you start put wave forcing on top of that, because that's how the ocean really works, you can see on the right-hand side, the wave forcing shows you a somewhat more dire scenario. When you get to even another, when you're at 2 meters, which is what we might potentially get by the end of the century, the wave forcing shows that you're going to be inundating a moderate portion of the island. This gets even worse at Midway. You can see this is East Island, where the airstrip was during World War II. Waves overwash nearly the entire island periodically by 2100 if we have 2 meters. And even on Sand Island, which is our main operational base up there, we're still looking at significant wave impacts that drive water completely through our buildings and through our airstrip. And this is a major divert airstrip for international flights across the Pacific. So if we use this, you have to reroute most of North Pacific international air travel. Precipitation has been steadily declining, at least in the main Hawaiian Islands over time. We were able to use old-time plantation gauges with long periods of record to show this. It's slow, but it's steady. Once again, we don't have good recording stations up in the Northwestern Islands, but the trend is apparently also toward drying as far as we can see. In terms of tropical storms, there's fewer of them in a warming climate, but the ones that form become more intense. And we just saw that play out in Florida with Hurricane Ian. And we have had storms that have come through the monument. Hurricane Walaka came through the monument in 2018. It underwent this typical recent pattern of rapid intensification that we're seeing globally. It went from a Category 1 to a Category 4 in only 30 hours, passed over French frigate shoals. And the result was that certain of our islets, such as East Island, which was a major sea turtle nesting site, essentially disappeared. On the 5th of May, we had an island. On the 18th of October, we didn't. This is Worldview 2 satellite imagery. We've had a bit of reshoaling since then, but essentially this was a stabilized vegetated island that has now become a sand spit. If you look at Tern Island, which was remodeled by the Navy into a unsinkable aircraft carrier during World War II, you can also see we had a significant amount of sand overwash and erosion on Tern. And this was another one of our major operational bases in the center part of the preserve. The other result of all this off Tern Island was that Rapture Reef, our really iconic site that shows up on all of our promotional materials and such, essentially was taken from what you see at the top to a field of devastated rubble. We're monitoring this for recovery, but the process is going to be very slow. So the result is that these tropical storms, even though they're infrequent, have enormous effects when they actually hit us. There's changing ocean chemistry, which everybody calls ocean acidification, but if the oceans are acidic, we're all dead, so it's a bad term. And this is also likely to be a steadily increasing problem over time. A declining curve here is bad, which is different than the other curves. It lowers your aragonite saturation point, which makes it harder for corals to build hard structure or rebuild hard structure after they've been damaged from things like hurricanes that I just showed. And you can see we've got a very good monitoring station pelagically off of Oahu to the north. And the data from there is pretty clear that as atmospheric CO2 has risen over time, our ocean chemistry has changed in pH over time. So we actually have some pretty clear evidence that this is occurring, and it probably will have effects biologically on our corals. Okay, so the bottom line for all of this is that in terms of the monument, ocean heat content will steadily increase over time. Sea level will continue to rise, probably at a faster rate. Severe storms will be fewer but more intense. Changes in precipitation, we're not quite sure. And ocean chemistry, the ocean surface pH and probably the pelagic deeper pH will continue to decline. So what do we do about it? Okay, the monument management boards in 2011 realized we had a problem, set up a steering committee and said, create a climate change action plan. We held a expert workshop in 2012 that had basically a bunch of scientists and such, and they came up with a draft climate change action plan. We then had another expert workshop in 2013 to review this further. We brought in managers, cultural practitioners, and scientists, mixed them all together, and try to develop strategies on how to implement some sort of actions that we could do to address climate change in the monument. Essentially, this is what we came up with. We can implement transdisciplinary research and monitoring, which of course we've already been doing since I just showed you all that science. We can implement appropriate adaptive actions, try to basically, to some extent, defend our infrastructure and such. There's only so much we can do for the ecosystems. They largely have to adapt on their own. We can account for climate change in our operations and logistical planning and try not to, contribute more to the problem than we have to by doing climate smart types of ways of generating electricity and, on our various other operations. Contribute toward national and regional efforts to raise awareness of the problem, because we can't solve this one on our own. It's going to take global concerted action. And finally, serve as an international example, as and among other things, coming to forums like this, explaining the problem and showing what we're trying to do. So there is a climate change vulnerability assessment that came out in the NOAA Marine Sanctuaries Conservation Series in June 2016. You can go on the web and download this. And this basically outlines all of the various findings that I just showed you in this presentation. And it forms the basis for our climate change action plan. We had an initial plan, but everything has changed. And the result is that we are having to revise that as we speak. And so the bottom line is isolation is no defense for a big site like ours. We're experiencing all the same climate change issues that everybody else is. And although we can monitor the symptoms, the only solution is to address underlying causes. That takes global action. And one last note, that if you're 30 years or younger in age, no month of your life has had below average global temperatures based on records from 1880 to the present. So your whole life has been above long-term average at this point. The future's here. The question is, how do we manage it? And I'll take questions.
Yeah, and that was a great presentation. I think that in the interest of time, if folks can keep putting questions in the chat, that would be super helpful. We'll follow up with them on the side. But the data you shared is absolutely striking, and thanks for a fantastic presentation.
Yeah, as I've noted, it's very data intense, and I'm happy to just handle questions in chat or email subsequently.
Awesome. Thank you so much.